can you give us a brief background on the group that started this and the group that currently runs it?
Right. So this, again, started back in the 1990s. And back then, it was my dad who started it and his team. He's an engineer by profession. And so it started with this engineering company called Blue Star. And that's when it started for that development piece of land that I was speaking of.
Yeah.
Right? But thankfully, they tried to do a conservation innovation approach instead, where you restore more portions of the land instead of developing the areas. So now development supports the conservation of the larger ecosystem as opposed to, just staying by the minimum requirements of having 30% open spaces, etc. So that is how it actually got started. Now in 2016 was when I came along, and the idea was to start a Masungi Georeserve Foundation so that we could set aside funds. It's a nonprofit, it's a foundation, for the place itself. And Masungi Georeserve Foundation is now the one with an agreement for the restoration of the 2,700 hectares in the area.
How are you marrying the human aspect of rural development, government interventions that is necessary, by the way, and of course, your advocacy of not just conserving, but rehabilitating the areas that are deteriorating, as you mentioned?
If we look at the involvement of the communities, they're actually our foremost partners in conservation. Some of the communities there have been there for such a long time already. I'm talking about the indigenous population, the indigenous cultural communities of the Dumagat Remontado and their elders, who have huge indigenous wisdom to share, right? And there was a time when we actually had an issue with a land grabber that was trying to take over 1,000 hectares of land. And they were the ones who helped us collect the information, overcome tribal dealers. The elders were the ones who helped us do that so that the land is brought back into conservation. And it's wonderful because you see how everyone who genuinely cares for the land tries to work together to overcome all of these huge challenges. We have been able to bring back the customary laws and the traditional decision makers, the elders, in a particular community that was at the point already overwhelmed by interest for land grabbing. So that was a wonderful joint initiative and joint effort. And today, we're both monitoring the site involved.
You mentioned the land grabbing a lot in terms of the challenges. Is that the biggest challenge with regards to the conservation efforts and the rehabilitation efforts as well?
Well, a lot of it starts with land grabbing, right? This is when people come in to occupy land and use it for purposes outside of conservation. Normally at scale, at business or commercial interest, even when it is illegal. And that's really the starting point. When they take possession of these lands, do those sales that lead to land use changes that are incompatible with protected areas. That's how you have land legal quarries come in. That's how you end up resorts with no agreements inside the most sensitive parts of protected areas, among other things.
So 11% in terms of the forested area, I believe. I mean, that is a frighteningly small number, considering. Is there any positive progression with regards to that in terms of your conservation efforts, your rehabilitation efforts? What would it take, and perhaps how long, I think is going to be one of the bigger questions, before we see that number consistently rise?
So the idea behind Masungi is to rewild these parts, right? We're not just talking about, looking at the satellite imagery and seeing a lot of greenery and trees in the area. We're talking about bringing the ecosystem back, right? The forest cover and the native species back. And restoration of these parts take a much longer time than we think. To bring back and rewild forest spaces, it could take up to 100 and 120 years, well beyond our lifetime, both, even if we're both still young.
Yeah.
I assume.
Yeah, we're assuming young. Yeah, I like that assumption. That's a great assumption. But go on, yes.
Right? So it is going to take a while. Right now, what's very important is to make sure that the habitat is protected, because there's simply no way to bring back the biodiversity and plant trees with the intention of those growing for the long haul, if you know that it's going to be put down anyway in the next 5 years because there's a competing land interest that's at work, right? So that's very important for us, making sure that the land is secured for conservation. And in terms of that, we have made those progress. We just talked about one of the key achievements a while ago, getting the agreement that was going to see 1,300 hectares of these mountains leveled out canceled. We've overcome more than 5 large-scale land grabbing attempts from 100 hectares to 1,000 hectares in scale. We already have monitoring stations, ranger stations, 15 of them in hot spots of these conservation sites, allowing it to get monitored 24/7. And what else? Over 150,000 trees planted.
You know, I think that after hearing this, a lot of people will be more interested in helping or rewild Masungi. Is there any message that you could give those who are interested in helping and interested to reach out? Because obviously, you want more attention towards this, more awareness. Can you tell our viewers here how they could reach out? How they could see, how could they see your efforts, and of course, what they could do to help as well?
Right. So for those who are interested to learn more about protecting Masungi and contributing to the conservation sites, protected areas across the Philippines, please feel free to follow us online. We're on Facebook. We post all of our updates there. We're also on Instagram. We invite you to come out to see the site. It's different when you are on the ground and you see all of the activities that are happening. It's a wonderful cause for hope, and we hope that you could be a part of it. Please come out to see us, keep us company.
She is a geotourism advocate, a conservationist, and a conversationalist after this.
Conversationalist.
She is a National Geographic explorer, and she is also, as we mentioned a while ago, the managing trustee of the Masungi Georeserve. Ladies and gentlemen, Miss Ann Dumaliang, maraming salamat. Thank you very much for joining us on the show.
Thank you, Paolo.